evening and welcome. A brilliant thinker stands out for his capacity to be ahead of times, for being able to combine things that are apparently contradictory, and for not sticking with convictions, but accepting to be challenged by unexpected findings and other realities each day anew. Tonight we have the extraordinary privilege to have such a brilliant thinker at the World Peace Academy. I very warmly welcome you, Dr. Fritjof Capra.
Thank you, Katrin Brunner, for this very nice introduction, and I also want to thank my old friend Elisabeth Stern, whom I haven't seen in many years, for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here and speak to an international audience. In fact, I'm quite glad that this whole discussion will be in English. At the beginning, I was afraid you would all asking questions in the Basler dialect, and I was a little scared about that, but I'm quite comfortable with English. Well, I want to begin with the big picture. In the second decade of our new century, it is becoming ever more evident that concern with the environment is no longer a single isolated issue, just as peace is not a single isolated issue. It is in fact the context of everything else, of our lives, our businesses, our politics. One of the great challenges of our time is to build and nurture sustainable communities. That is, communities, social, cultural and physical environments in which we can satisfy our needs and aspirations without diminishing the chances of future generations. This is the sort of classical definition of ecological sustainability introduced in the early 1980s. And since that time, the concept of sustainability has often been distorted, co-opted, and even trivialized by being used without the ecological context that gives it its proper meaning. So I think it is worthwhile to reflect for a moment about what sustainability really means. And we might just begin by asking, what is sustained in a sustainable society? Well, what is sustained is not economic growth or competitive advantage or many of these things that business people or bankers like to talk about. What is sustained is the entire web of life on which our long-term survival depends. In other words, a sustainable community must be designed in such a way that its ways of life, its businesses, its technologies, its physical structures and so on do not interfere with nature's inherent ability to sustain life. This is the key. We must not interfere with nature's ability to sustain life. And of course, if we take this seriously, then the first step must be to understand how nature sustains life. It turns out that this involves a new ecological understanding of life, as well as a new kind of systemic thinking, which means thinking in terms of relationships, in terms of patterns, in terms of context. And indeed, such a new understanding of life has emerged over the last 30 years or so. And this has been the focus of my work over the last 30 years. At the forefront of contemporary science, the universe is no longer seen as a machine composed of elementary building blocks. We have discovered that the material world ultimately is a network of inseparable patterns of relationships. We also have discovered that the planet as a whole is a living, self-regulating and self-organizing system. Correspondingly, the view of the human body as a machine and of the mind as a separate entity is now being replaced by one that sees not only the brain, but also the immune system, the bodily tissues, and even each single cell as a living system, and what is more, as a cognitive system, because life and cognition always go together. Evolution is no longer seen as a competitive struggle for existence, but rather as a kind of cooperative dance in which creativity and the constant emergence of novelty are the driving forces. And with the new emphasis on complexity, on networks and patterns of organization, a new science of qualities is now slowly emerging. Now, the synthesis of this emerging new understanding of life and the discussion of its philosophical, social and political implications has been my work for the past 30 years. I published my synthesis as it evolved in 2 books. One is called The Web of Life, which I published in 1996, and the second one is called The Hidden Connections, published in 2002. And I'm now working on the final version, at least until further notice, on the final version of this synthesis in a really big volume, which will be a textbook for university students, published by Cambridge University Press, and it is called The Systems View of Life. And I'm writing it with a colleague, an Italian biologist, Pierluigi Luisi, who is a professor of biology in Rome. Now, obviously, I cannot go into many details here of this new understanding of life, because it would take me at least a week of lectures to do that. But let me just give you some of the highlights. One of the most important insights of the new scientific understanding of life is the recognition that networks are the basic pattern of organization of living systems. As you probably know, ecosystems are understood in terms of so-called food webs, networks of organisms. Organisms are networks of cells, also of organs and organ systems, and cells are networks of molecules. So we see the network is a pattern that is common to all life. Wherever we see life, we see networks. Now, it is also important to realize that these living networks are not material structures like a fishing net or a spider's web. So you cannot go out into nature and take a picture of the web of life, because you actually don't see it. The web of life is a pattern of relationships among various life processes. And when you chart those relationships, make a map of them, you see they're interconnected in network fashion. And in a cell, for example, the processes are chemical reactions between the cell's molecules. In an ecosystem, the processes are feeding processes, organisms eating one another. And in both cases, the network is a functional pattern. We talk about functional networks interconnecting various processes. And these living networks have been studied very extensively over the last 30 years. And these studies have revealed that their key characteristic is that they are self-generating. For example, in a cell, you have a membrane which is semi-permeable, that is, it lets certain molecules in and keeps others out. And these molecules are small molecules. They are sugars and various compounds, small compounds. And out of these small molecules, the cellular network builds the relatively large structures like proteins, the DNA, the RNA, the cell membranes, and so on. All of this is being built by the cellular network, and whenever a cell creates a new protein, say, biologists say it's the synthesis of a new protein, then as soon as this protein is ready, is finished, it contributes to the cellular network to facilitate the construction of other parts of the cell. So in this way, the parts of the cell are continually produced, repaired, and regenerated by the cellular network. And similarly, at the level of a multicellular organism, the bodily cells are continually regenerated and recycled by the organism's metabolic network. So we see that living networks continually create or recreate themselves by transforming or replacing their components. Now, the interesting thing is that life in the social realm can also be understood in terms of networks, as everybody knows by now. I remember when I was teaching this 20 years ago, I had to explain to my students what a social network is. Now, you laugh, because now my students explain it to me. Or my daughter explains it to me, who is 26, and she knows much more about social networks than I know. So this has really been accepted and developed in society. And of course, in social networks, we do not talk about chemical reactions, we talk about communications. Human social networks are networks of communications. Now, the interesting thing is that, like biological networks, they also generate themselves continually, but what they generate is mostly non-material. Each communication in a social network creates information, thoughts, and meaning. And out of this meaning come new communications, and so the entire network continually generates itself. I've been very fascinated by this comparison between biological and social networks, and in my book, The Hidden Connections, my synthesis of this new framework is largely based on the analysis of the similarities and differences between biological and social networks. But my aim is not only to offer a unified view of life, mind, and society, but also to develop a coherent systemic approach to some of the critical issues of our time. And I want to turn to this part now because at the World Peace Academy this is your main interest. Now, if you look at the world today, you can see that there are two developments that will have major impacts on the well-being and ways of life of humanity. And both of them involve networks. And they also involve radically new technologies. One of these developments has been the rise of global capitalism. The other is the creation of sustainable communities based on the practice of ecological design. Now, both work with networks, but whereas global capitalism is concerned with electronic networks of financial flows, eco-design is concerned with ecological networks of flows of energy and matter. The goal of the global economy in its present form is to maximize the wealth and power of its elites. The goal of the eco-design movement is to maximize the sustainability of the web of life. Let me now review these two developments in some more detail. As you well know, during the past 3 decades, the information technology revolution has given rise to a new type of capitalism that is profoundly different from the one formed during the Industrial Revolution, the capitalism Karl Marx was writing about, and it is also different from the so-called Keynesian capitalism that emerged after World War II. It is characterized by 3 fundamental features. Its core economic activities are global. So for the first time we have a global economic system as the dominant system. Secondly, the main sources of productivity and competitiveness are innovation and information processing. And thirdly, this capitalism is structured largely around networks of financial flows. This system is also referred to as the new economy, or sometimes simply as globalization. And in this new economy, capital works in real time, moving rapidly through global financial networks. Sophisticated information and communication technologies enable financial capital to move rapidly from one option to another in a relentless global search for investment opportunities. So in this system, you can invest your money, or you can speculate with your money by putting it into any kind of project, any company, any venture around the world. And if you don't like it, you can withdraw it again after an hour, even after a minute, even after seconds. And in fact, as you probably know, these hedge funds and these very large investments that are done for fractions of a second do this, and they can do it because of computers. It's an automatic investment and withdrawal. So what we really have here is an electronically operated global casino. And in fact, people today, financial experts, speak of a casino economy. That's what we have. And the impact of this casino economy on human well-being has been mostly negative. It has certainly enriched a global elite of financial speculators, entrepreneurs, and high-tech professionals. And at the very top, there has been an unprecedented accumulation of wealth. But overall, its social and environmental consequences have been disastrous. And as we see in the current financial crisis, it has also severely endangered the financial well-being of people around the world. Well, in the last few years, the social and ecological impacts of globalization have been discussed extensively by scholars and community leaders. Their analyses show that the new economy is producing a multitude of interconnected harmful consequences, such as rising social inequality and social exclusion, a breakdown of democracy, and you could say a breakdown of peace, because these financial flows are very often supported by military power, more rapid and extensive deterioration of the natural environment, and increasing poverty and alienation. The new global capitalism has threatened and destroyed local communities around the world, and with the pursuit of an ill-conceived biotechnology, it has invaded the sanctity of life by attempting to turn diversity into monoculture, ecology into engineering, and life itself into a commodity. And all this is promoted vigorously by the folks half a kilometer away from here, the agrochemical, petrochemical industries. It has become increasingly clear that global capitalism in its present form is unsustainable, socially, ecologically, and even financially, and needs to be fundamentally redesigned. And indeed, scholars, community leaders, and activists around the world are raising their voices, demanding that we must change the game, and suggesting concrete ways of doing so. Well, how can we do it? How can we change this seemingly so powerful global economy? Well, I think the first thing we have to realize is although the global financial system got out of hand and became very unstable, it has been consciously designed, and therefore it can be reshaped. The so-called global market is really a network of machines, a network of computers programmed according to certain rules, the so-called free trade rules, and programmed especially according to an underlying fundamental principle. And that is the principle that making money should always take precedence over any other human value, whether it is democracy, human rights, peace, environmental protection, or any other human value. However, human values are not natural laws. Human values can change. The same electronic networks of financial and informational flows could have other values built into them. The critical issue is not technology, but politics. So today, you see, if you make an investment in the global financial market, there are computer-assisted or computer-managed strategies that will tell you when there's a choice of going either one way or the other way. The computers are programmed in such a way that they tell you to go where the money is. They don't care about human rights or the natural environment, but these values could be programmed into the system. So they could be taken into account. This is why I say the critical issue is not technology, but politics. Now, at the turn of this century, an impressive global coalition of NGOs formed around a different set of core values. And by and large, we can say that the two core values embraced by this international coalition of NGOs are human dignity and ecological sustainability. And this coalition, also known as the Global Justice Movement, has organized a series of very successful protests, beginning with Seattle in 1999. And it has also held several World Social Forum meetings, most of them in Brazil, which were originally conceived as sort of counter-congresses to the Davos Economic Forum meeting, but then took on their own identity and have continued since then. And at these meetings, the NGOs proposed a whole set of alternative trade policies, including concrete and radical proposals for restructuring the global financial institutions, which would profoundly change the nature of globalization. In my book, The Hidden Connections, I go into the details of what they proposed. I don't have the time now to go into this. Let me just emphasize that this global justice movement exemplifies a new kind of political movement that is typical of our information age. Because of their skillful use of various social media, all based on the internet, The NGOs in the coalition are able to network with each other, to share information, and to mobilize their members with unprecedented speed. And that's a general characteristic of politics today, as we have recently seen in the Arab Spring and in the Occupy movement. As a result, this new coalition of NGOs has emerged as an effective political actor independent of traditional national or international institutions. It constitutes a new kind of global civil society. Now, to place the political discourse within a systemic and ecological perspective, the global civil society relies on a network of scholars, research institutes, think tanks, and centers of learning that largely operate outside our leading academic institutions and business organizations, and also outside the leading government agencies. And of course, this place here, the World Peace Academy, is part of that. I assume you have an NGO status, and you are part of this worldwide coalition. It is important to know and to emphasize that we not only protest against the status quo and the casino financial net, the casino finance, but we also have our scholars, we have our Nobel laureates, we do our research and we teach. So there are literally dozens of institutions like this around the world. And most of them are communities of both scholars and activists who are engaged in a wide variety of campaigns and projects. I researched these projects when I wrote my book, The Hidden Connections, and in the last chapters I list the various websites of these organizations, and I have found that there seem to be three clusters of issues that are focal points for the largest and most active grassroots coalitions. One is the challenge of reshaping the governing rules and institutions of globalization. Another is the opposition to genetically modified foods and the promotion of sustainable agriculture. And the third is ecological design, a concerted effort to redesign our physical structures, cities, technologies, and industries so as to make them ecologically sustainable. So I now want to concentrate on that third issue cluster and talk a little bit about, again, sustainability and eco-design. As I mentioned before, a sustainable community must be designed in such a way that its ways of life, businesses, economy, physical structures and technologies do not interfere with nature's inherent ability to sustain life. And the first step in this endeavor must be to understand how nature sustains life. To do so, we need to move from biology to ecology, because sustained life is the property of an ecosystem rather than a single organism or species. Over billions of years of evolution, the Earth's ecosystems have evolved certain principles of organization to sustain the web of life. The knowledge of these principles of organization, or principles of ecology, is crucial for designing sustainable human communities. Indeed, I believe that in the coming decades, the survival of humanity will depend on our ecological literacy, as it were, on our ability to understand the basic principles of ecology and to live accordingly. And this means that ecological literacy must become a critical skill for politicians, business leaders, and professionals in all spheres, and should be the most important part of education at all levels, from primary and secondary schools to colleges, universities, and the continuing education and training of professionals. This is where I have chosen to do my practical activist work, if you wish. With some friends, I founded an organization called Center for Ecoliteracy in Berkeley, in California, about 20 years ago. And we developed a special pedagogy for teaching ecology and systemic thinking, the principles of ecology, in public schools, from kindergarten all the way to graduation from high school. And we started this 20 years ago, and now we have worked with 300 with schools in 300 cities on all the continents, and have reached indirectly about 5 million children. Not directly, of course, but through this network. And what we developed is a pedagogy that is systemic. That means teaches the thinking that is necessary to understand ecosystems, thinking in terms of relationships, in terms of patterns. It is also multidisciplinary, because ecology connects various disciplines. An ecosystem connects the living world with the non-living. So to understand how ecosystems work, you not only need to understand biology and evolution, but also soil chemistry, atmospheric chemistry, thermodynamics, and various other sciences. And so you have the only way to really teach ecology is in a multidisciplinary way. And the third aspect of our pedagogy is that we teach it in an experiential way. So the school children go out into nature, into a school garden, where they grow and harvest fruits and vegetables, which they then cook, and they learn where food comes from and how it is related to the basic processes of life. Or they go into a riverbed and do river or creek restoration or practical hands-on work. So all this is to teach our children the basic principles of ecology, which are, if you wish, the basic facts of life. And it so happens that our political and corporate leaders today are also largely ignorant of these basic facts of life. For example, of the fact that one species' waste is another species' food, so that matter cycles continually through the web of life. The fact that the energy driving these ecological cycles flows from the sun. That diversity assures resilience. And perhaps most importantly, that life from its beginning, more than 3 billion years ago, did not take over the planet by combat, but by networking. And I think this principle of ecology is perhaps especially relevant to your work in peace studies and peace activism. So ecological literacy is the first step on the road to sustainability. The second step is ecological design. We need to apply our ecological knowledge to the fundamental redesign of our technologies and social institutions, so as to bridge the current gap between human design and the ecologically sustainable systems of nature. Now, from an ecological point of view, you can say that design consists in shaping flows of energy and matter for human purposes. I find this a very beautiful definition of design, shaping flows of energy and matter for human purposes. Ecological design, then, is a process in which our human purposes are carefully meshed with the larger patterns and flows of the natural world. And therefore, ecological design principles reflect the principles of organization that nature has evolved to sustain the web of life. Now, to practice design in such a context requires a fundamental shift in our attitude toward nature. A shift from finding out what we can extract from nature to finding out what we can learn from her. And as you probably know, in recent years there has been a dramatic rise in ecologically oriented design practices and projects, all of which are now well documented. And again, in the Hidden Connections, I have a long section on documenting these ecological design projects with references and so on. Now, let me just mention a few examples. There has been a worldwide renaissance in organic farming, which is not usually counted as an eco-design practice, but I think it should be, because organic farmers practicing what is known as agroecology use the principles of ecology to increase their yields, to protect their crops from pests and so on, just by a knowledge of nature. We also have organizations that try to cluster different industries together physically, geographically, in such a way that the waste of one industry can serve as a resource for the next, just as the waste of one species serves as food for the next. This is done mainly with organic wastes, say from coffee plantations or various food production systems. But eco-designers also want to do it with technological products, and they speak of a service and flow economy, where you would not buy a product, but you would buy the service. And the basic idea is that if I want to if I buy a television set, for instance, my aim is not to own a box of toxic chemicals. That's not why I'm buying it. I buy it to watch TV. In my case, I buy it to watch Roger Federer, because I'm a huge Federer fan. So I buy it to watch tennis. So what I could do and should do is buy the service, so that the television screen belongs to the manufacturer, and the manufacturer will take it back after its lifetime, or when I want to buy a different or new screen. And the materials are taken apart, the television is taken apart, and all the materials are recycled. This is done not only, I don't think it's done for television yet, but it's done for cars, for copy machines, and various other technological products. Well, buildings, architecture is another big field of eco-design, the so-called green architecture. We now have buildings designed to produce more energy than they consume, buildings that emit no waste, and that monitor their own performance. Then in transportation we have new types of cars, hybrid electric cars and fully electric cars, achieving much greater fuel efficiencies. And I think we're just before the next big step in car manufacture to make ultralight cars that are made of so-called plastic composites, plastic with carbon fibers in them. Those are the materials that are used for Formula One cars, which are extremely accident resistant, extremely sturdy and elastic, and are ultralight. So when your car weighs half of what a metal car weighs, then basic physics tells you you use half the gasoline, and so that's a huge saving, of course, in energy. Well, then we have, of course, a dramatic increase of solar and wind electricity beyond even the most optimistic projections that were made a few years ago. All these eco-design technologies and projects incorporate the basic principles of ecology, and therefore they have some key characteristics in common. They tend to be small-scale projects with plenty of diversity, energy efficient, non-polluting, community-oriented, and labor-intensive, that is, creating lots of jobs. The technologies available now provide compelling evidence that the transition to the sustainable future is no longer a technical nor a conceptual problem. It is a problem of political will and leadership. This is an enterprise that transcends all our differences of race, culture, or class. The Earth is our common home, and creating a sustainable world for our children and future generations is our common task. And let me end here, and thank you very much for your attention.